What if I told you that at exactly 40:17 a.m. on August 16, 2025, President Ibrahim Traoré personally prevented World War III from starting in Africa? What if 57 trucks carrying enough weapons to destroy an entire nation were stopped just hours before a coordinated coup attempt? And what if the masterminds behind this 700 million conspiracy were people you'd never suspect? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about modern warfare, foreign interference, and one African leader's incredible fight for sovereignty. August 16, 2025, 47 a.m. The Kanchari region near Burkina Faso's border with Togo. Border Commander Captain Massa Kabore was finishing his routine night patrol when something caught his eye that made his blood run cold. A convoy of massive trucks moving slowly through the darkness, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn silence like guilty secrets. But this wasn't just any convoy. 57 vehicles, each one heavily loaded, moving at an hour when even smugglers usually sleep. Captain Kabore had seen enough suspicious activity in his 15 years of border duty, but nothing like this. The sheer size of the convoy, the deliberate spacing between vehicles, the way they avoided main roads, everything screamed danger. Within minutes, Kabore was on his secure radio to President Ibrahim Traoré himself. "Mr. President," he whispered urgently, "we have a situation that could change everything. I need immediate authorization for a full intercept operation." Traoré didn't hesitate for a second. He understood that in modern warfare, the most dangerous battles aren't fought on traditional battlefields. They're fought in the shadows with weapons that appear as humanitarian aid and conspiracies disguised as democracy movements. "Captain," the president replied with ice-cold determination, "whatever you're seeing, stop it. Use every resource at your disposal. And Captain, document everything. The world needs to see what's really happening in Africa." But here's where this story gets absolutely insane. What they found inside those trucks wasn't just weapons. It was evidence of the most sophisticated foreign interference operation ever attempted on African soil. And the list of people involved will blow your mind. Special Forces Commander General Ibrahim Zerbo received his orders at 4:103 a.m. Deploy every available unit, establish a perimeter that these trucks cannot escape, and prepare for the possibility that this convoy might be defended by people willing to kill to protect their cargo. The operation began with military precision. Helicopter surveillance confirmed the convoy's exact route. Drone footage revealed that several trucks had modified chassis, clearly designed to carry much heavier loads than normal cargo vehicles. Advanced thermal imaging showed unusual heat signatures from inside the vehicles, suggesting electronics, possibly detonators, and definitely not the agricultural equipment that the truck manifests claimed. At exactly 4:45 a.m., the trap was sprung. Special forces emerged from the darkness simultaneously at 3 different choke points along the convoy's route. Floodlights illuminated the scene like daylight. The lead truck tried to ram through the roadblock but was immediately disabled by spike strips and precision tire shots. When the dust settled and 57 drivers were in custody, Captain Kabore approached the first truck with bolt cutters, not knowing that what he was about to discover would expose an international conspiracy that reached the highest levels of global politics. The first truck's cargo bay opened with a metallic screech that seemed to echo across the desert, and what Captain Kabore saw made him immediately call President Traoré again. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking, "you need to see this with your own eyes. We haven't just stopped a weapons shipment. We've uncovered evidence of planned genocide." Because inside those trucks wasn't just military hardware. There were detailed maps of every government building in Ouagadougou, lists of political figures marked for elimination, and communication equipment sophisticated enough to coordinate simultaneous attacks across multiple countries. Someone was planning to turn all of West Africa into a war zone. The inventory was staggering beyond belief. 25,000 AK-47 assault rifles, each one capable of firing 600 rounds per minute. 10,000 M16 rifles with advanced tactical scopes. 13 million rounds of ammunition, enough to sustain active combat for 6 months. 70,000 hand grenades. 2,500 rocket-propelled grenade launchers. 400 surface-to-air missiles capable of shooting down commercial aircraft. And 50 tons of military-grade explosives. But the most chilling discovery was a waterproof briefcase in the lead truck containing documents that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso. The papers detailed Operation Democratic Restoration, a coordinated plan to simultaneously overthrow governments in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea, and Chad. The operation had a budget of $700 million. Phase 1. Deliver weapons to pre-positioned cells in each target country. Phase 2. Stage terrorist attacks blamed on existing governments. Phase 3. Activate planted military officers to launch coordinated coups during the resulting chaos. Phase 4. Install pro-Western puppet governments that would immediately sign new mining contracts and military base agreements. President Traoré arrived at the scene at dawn, and what he saw confirmed his worst fears about modern neo-colonialism. This isn't weapons trafficking. He told his security team. This is attempted continental conquest disguised as humanitarian intervention. But wait, it gets even more shocking. When they interrogated the drivers, they discovered that most of them genuinely believed they were transporting agricultural equipment for a development project. The level of deception was so sophisticated that even the people carrying out the operation didn't know they were participating in a plot to destroy their own countries. Driver Mark Antoine Zongo broke first under interrogation. Tears streaming down his face, he explained how he'd been recruited through a legitimate shipping company. They told us we were helping to modernize African agriculture, he sobbed. They showed us official papers from international development organizations. We thought we were heroes bringing progress to rural communities. But intelligence officers quickly realized that only the convoy coordinators knew the true nature of the cargo. The operation had been compartmentalized so that if any individual was captured, they couldn't reveal the full scope of the conspiracy. It was a level of operational security typically used only by major intelligence agencies. The breakthrough came when investigators recovered encrypted satellite phones from the convoy leaders. The communication logs revealed contact with numbers in Paris, Washington, London, and Tel Aviv. Code names appeared repeatedly: Continental Reset, African Dawn, and most ominously, Final Solution Sahel. Within 48 hours, President Traoré had authorized Operation Thunderbolt, simultaneous raids on 17 locations across Ouagadougou, where the intercepted communications suggested weapons were being stored or conspirators were meeting. And what they found in those raids will make you question everything you thought you knew about who really controls African politics. Because among the arrested conspirators were people with direct connections to major world powers, multinational corporations, and international organizations that publicly claim to support African development. The raids yielded shocking results. Warehouse 7 in the industrial district contained enough additional weapons to equip a division-sized military unit. But more importantly, investigators found detailed organizational charts showing the conspiracy's command structure. At the top, unnamed, International Steering Committee members identified only by code numbers. Below them, regional coordinators with connections to embassies, mining companies, and international NGOs. At the operational levels, former military officers, disgruntled politicians, and business leaders who had lost influence under Traoré's sovereignty-focused policies. The most devastating evidence came from the personal computers of arrested businessman François Bongo, a prominent opposition figure who had publicly criticized Traoré's anti-Western policies. His hard drive contained months of encrypted emails detailing the conspiracy's timeline, funding sources, and target lists. Under interrogation, Bongo's facade crumbled completely. "You have to understand," he pleaded, "they promised us that African democracy was failing and needed outside intervention. They showed us economic projections proving that our countries would collapse without Western guidance. We thought we were preventing chaos, not creating it." But the most chilling part of Bongo's confession was his description of the planning meetings. They weren't held in some back room, he revealed. They took place in 5-star hotels in Accra and Abidjan. European diplomats attended. American consultants provided strategic advice. The whole thing was treated like a legitimate business conference. But here's the part that will absolutely blow your mind. The conspirators had already chosen the members of the new governments they planned to install. They had selected ministers, written policy papers, and even designed new national flags. They were so confident of success that they were already dividing up Africa's resources before firing a single shot. President Traoré called an emergency session of the National Security Council to review the full scope of the evidence. The meeting room fell silent as Intelligence Chief Commandant Ouagadougou presented the conspiracy's organizational chart. "Mr. President," Ouagadougou began, What we've uncovered isn't just a coup attempt. It's a blueprint for the recolonization of West Africa. They had already selected puppet presidents for each target country. They had drafted new constitutions that would guarantee Western mining rights for 50 years. They had even planned the locations for new military bases. Defense Minister General Sano was visibly shaken. "The sophistication of this operation is unprecedented," he reported. "They had studied our military command structure, identified officers willing to collaborate, and planned simultaneous strikes on our key installations. If we hadn't stopped that convoy, Burkina Faso would have been in civil war within weeks." Interior Minister Hassan Konare added grimly. The psychological warfare component was particularly advanced. They had prepared social media campaigns to justify the coups as humanitarian interventions. International news outlets had already drafted stories about restoring democracy that would have been published the moment the shooting started. President Traoré stood and addressed the room with quiet fury. "Gentlemen, what we've discovered proves that the enemies of African sovereignty have not abandoned their colonial ambitions. They've simply modernized their methods. But they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated the determination of African people to remain free." And then Traoré did something that shocked the entire international community. Instead of handling this crisis quietly through diplomatic channels, he decided to expose the entire conspiracy to the world. What happened next changed the course of African history. On August 18th, President Traoré called a press conference that would be remembered as one of the most important moments in modern African history. Behind him stood a display of the confiscated weapons that stretched across the entire wall of the presidential palace's main hall. International journalists from every major news network had been invited to witness the evidence firsthand. "My fellow Burkinaban citizens of the world," Traoré began, "3 days ago, we intercepted the largest weapons smuggling operation in our nation's history. But this was not smuggling for profit. This was the opening phase of a coordinated attempt to destroy African sovereignty." Holding up François Bongo's confession and the recovered planning documents, the president continued, "I am not here to make accusations without evidence. Everything I am about to tell you is documented, verified, and available for independent investigation." The revelation that followed sent shockwaves around the world. Traoré methodically presented evidence of foreign involvement, showed photographs of the weapons, played audio recordings of the conspirators' planning sessions, and displayed organizational charts that traced the conspiracy's command structure to international power centers. "The question is not whether foreign powers attempted to overthrow our government," Traoré declared. "The question is whether the international community will finally acknowledge that African sovereignty is under systematic attack, and whether they will choose to support our right to self-determination or continue to pretend that such operations don't exist." But the most shocking moment came when President Traoré played a video confession from François Bongo that revealed the true scope of international involvement. What Bongo said on camera was so damaging that several countries immediately recalled their ambassadors from Burkina Faso. In the video, a broken François Bongo looked directly into the camera and delivered a confession that would reshape African geopolitics. "I want the people of Burkina Faso to know that I betrayed my own country," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Foreign powers convinced me that African leaders like President Traoré were obstacles to progress and development." Bongo's confession continued with devastating detail. "They told us that African governments were inherently corrupt and unstable, and that only Western guidance could bring peace and prosperity. They provided detailed plans for new governments that would prioritize foreign investment and international partnerships over national sovereignty." The most damaging part of the confession revealed the conspiracy's financing. The $700 million budget came from a combination of sources. Bongo admitted, mining companies provided funding because they wanted to secure long-term extraction rights. Defense contractors contributed because they expected massive arms sales to the new governments. And certain government agencies provided logistical support because they viewed African independence movements as threats to global stability. The international reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several Western governments issued statements denying any involvement, but their denials were undermined by the documentary evidence that Traoré had already shared with international media outlets. Russia's President Putin issued a statement calling the conspiracy, Clear evidence of ongoing neo-colonial intervention in African affairs. China's foreign ministry demanded a full international investigation. Turkey's President Erdogan offered to provide security assistance to Burkina Faso and other targeted nations. But here's where this story takes an incredible turn. Instead of using the seized weapons to strengthen his military, President Traoré announced a plan that stunned the world and turned instruments of death into symbols of hope. What he did next became a model for the entire continent. Standing before a crowd of 100,000 people in Independence Square, President Traoré announced the most remarkable decision in the history of conflict resolution. My fellow citizens, he declared, these weapons were intended to kill our children, destroy our communities, and steal our future. But we will transform them into tools of progress and symbols of peace. The crowd erupted in amazement as Traoré explained his plan. We will melt down these weapons and use the metal to build schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects. Every bullet will become a brick in a new school. Every rocket launcher will become steel beams for a new hospital. Every grenade will become reinforcement for bridges that connect our communities. But the president wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, we will use the monetary value of these weapons, over $700 million, to fund the largest infrastructure development program in our nation's history. 100 new schools, 50 health clinics, and 1,000 kilometers of irrigation canals. The enemies of Africa wanted to use these weapons to divide us. Instead, they will unite us and make us stronger. The symbolism was powerful, but the practical impact was even more significant. International development experts calculated that the infrastructure projects funded by the seized weapons would improve living conditions for over 2 million Burkina citizens. As the crowd watched in amazement, workers brought out a large furnace and began melting down the first batch of assault rifles. The molten metal was poured into molds designed to create the components for school desks, hospital equipment, and agricultural tools. And then something happened that no one expected. The story of Burkina Faso's victory over the conspiracy began inspiring similar movements across Africa. What started as a local security operation became a continental awakening that changed the entire balance of power in global politics. Within weeks of President Traoré's press conference, similar weapons seizures were reported in Mali, Niger, Guinea, and Chad, exactly the countries mentioned in the conspiracy's planning documents. It became clear that Burkina Faso's operation had disrupted a much larger network of destabilization efforts. Mali's transitional government announced the arrest of 12 individuals connected to the same conspiracy network. Niger's military leadership reported intercepting communications between local opposition groups and the same foreign coordinators identified in Burkina Faso's investigation. Guinea's government discovered weapons caches in locations that matched intelligence shared by President Traoré. The African Union called an emergency summit to address what Secretary General Moussa Faki Mahamat called the most serious threat to African sovereignty since the end of formal colonialism. The summit resulted in the creation of the Continental Security Coordination Protocol, establishing formal intelligence sharing mechanisms between African governments to prevent future destabilization operations. President Traoré addressed the African Union summit via video link, delivering a speech that would be quoted by African leaders for decades to come. Brothers and sisters, he said, what we discovered in Burkina Faso was not unique to our country. It was part of a systematic effort to prevent African unity and independence. But our victory proves that when we stand together, when we share information, and when we refuse to be divided against each other, we are stronger than any outside force. The continental response was unprecedented. African governments began coordinating their security operations, sharing intelligence about foreign interference networks, and supporting each other's efforts to expose and prevent destabilization operations. But the most incredible part of this story is what happened next. The international community was forced to choose between supporting African sovereignty or continuing to enable the kind of interference that had been exposed. And their choices revealed who Africa's real friends are. The diplomatic aftermath created clear divisions in the international community. Traditional Western allies of African nations found themselves in an impossible position. They could either condemn the conspiracy and risk exposing their own involvement, or defend it and reveal their true attitudes toward African sovereignty. Several European nations chose a middle path, acknowledging that unauthorized activities, may have occurred while denying official government involvement. The United States State Department issued a carefully worded statement expressing concern about allegations of foreign interference, while calling for thorough and transparent investigations. But other nations took much clearer positions. Russia's foreign minister called the conspiracy a textbook example of neo-colonial intervention that the international community must condemn unequivocally. China announced immediate increases in security cooperation with affected African nations. Iran offered to provide technical assistance for counter-intelligence operations. The most significant support came from unexpected sources. Brazil's president called President Traoré a hero of the Global South's struggle against imperialism. Venezuela offered to share its experience in resisting foreign-backed destabilization efforts. Even several European nations with strong independence movements expressed solidarity with Burkina Faso's fight for sovereignty. The contrast in international reactions revealed the true nature of global power structures. Nations that genuinely supported African independence rallied behind Traoré's government. Nations that preferred compliant African governments either remained silent or offered weak criticisms of the conspiracy. And here's the most important part of this entire story: it's not over. The weapons have been seized, the conspirators have been arrested, and the immediate threat has been stopped. But the larger battle for African sovereignty is just beginning, and President Ibrahim Traoré has shown the entire continent what's possible when leaders choose courage over compliance. Today, August 16th is celebrated across West Africa as Continental Sovereignty Day. Children in schools from Ouagadougou to Bamako learn about the night when one leader's vigilance prevented a continental catastrophe. The schools built with melted weapons educate a new generation of Africans who understand that their freedom is not guaranteed. It must be defended. President Traoré's final words at the weapons destruction ceremony have become a rallying cry for African independence movements. They brought weapons to divide us, but we turned them into tools to unite us. They brought chaos to weaken us, but we transformed it into strength. They brought foreign control to limit us, but we used it to expand our sovereignty. This is the African way. We take whatever is meant to destroy us and use it to build a better future. The message of this incredible story is clear: Africa's future will be determined by Africans, not by foreign powers operating in the shadows. The conspiracy against Burkina Faso failed because African leaders chose transparency over secrecy, unity over division, and sovereignty over dependence. But this victory is only the beginning. Across the continent, young leaders inspired by Traoré's example are standing up to foreign interference, exposing corruption, and putting their people's interests first. The weapons meant to destroy African independence have been transformed into the foundation of African strength. If you believe in African sovereignty, if you support leaders who choose their people over foreign interests, and if you want to see more stories of African triumph over external manipulation, then you need to share this story with everyone you know. Subscribe to this channel to stay updated on the real stories of African leadership that mainstream media won't tell you. Hit the like button to support independent journalism that exposes the truth about foreign interference in African affairs. And most importantly, share this video because the world needs to know that Africa is awake. Africa is united, and Africa will determine its own destiny. The battle for African independence didn't end with colonialism, it just changed forms. But as President Ibrahim Traoré proved on that August morning in 2025, when African leaders choose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, and sovereignty over submission, no conspiracy can succeed. The weapons are melted, the schools are built, and the message is clear. Africa belongs to Africans. And that's a truth that no amount of foreign interference can ever change. Remember, every time you share this story, you're helping to spread the truth about African strength and sovereignty. Don't let this incredible victory be forgotten. Share it now, and let the world know that Africa is rising,